The rain had begun before dawn and never truly ceased. It thinned at times into a silver mist that hung above the reeds and the churned brown road, then gathered its strength again, and came on with a cold patience that felt less like weather than judgment. Catelyn rode beneath it with her hood drawn low and watched her son through the streaming fringe of wool and fur, watched the bowed line of his shoulders, and the way the wet had darkened his hair almost black. Robb Stark had gone to war a boy with glory in him and stubborn music in his blood. The young man riding now looked older than his years, older even than the lords who followed him, as if every raven that had ever found him on the march had set another weight upon his back and left him a little grimmer than before. Northmen and rivermen trudged behind and before them in a long, sodden file, shields slick with rain, banners hanging heavy as if too weary to stir. The white son of Karstark was gone from their host. So were many other banners that had ridden south proud and full in the green days of the war. Some had vanished at Oxcross, some at Duskendale, some in skirmishes by river fords and nameless villages burned down to their black bones. Some had gone home with grief or anger, and some were gone because the dead had no roads left to follow. The men who remained still loved Robb. Catelyn knew that. Yet, love was one thing in the singing of halls, another beneath rain with winter creeping nearer, and the taste of defeat beginning at last to sour old victories. Ahead, through the gauze of the downpour, the twins rose from either bank of the green fork like two clenched fists of gray stone. The bridge between them stretched over the river in a narrow hard line, and in the middle, the water tower stood above the current, like a watcher planted there to count the men who crossed and the men who drowned. Frey banners stirred from the battlements, blue and gray against the wet sky, and even at that distance Catelyn felt her stomach knot. Once she had crossed here with Ned and little Robb in her arms. Once she had crossed laughing with her father's escort on the way to Winterfell, with the world still simple enough to imagine that marriages bound houses cleanly, and oaths held because men had made them beneath the eyes of gods. It seemed a tale told to children now. Guessed right, fealty, blood. All of it could be bent if enough ambition leaned upon it, or enough fear. Grey Wind did not share those illusions. The direwolf ranged along the column's edge in a pelt made dark by rain, his head low, his fur ridge prickled from neck to tail. More than once he broke from the roadside to lope near Robb's horse, glancing up as if to urge him away. When Frey outriders appeared ahead in dull mail and blue cloaks, the wolf stopped dead in the mud and bared his teeth so suddenly that the horses sidled and shied. "Easy," Robb said, though it was plain enough the word was meant for more than the beast. The outriders reined up at a respectful distance. Their captain wore a fox fur collar over ringmail gone orange at the seams. Rain dripped from his nose. He bent stiffly from the saddle. His lordship awaits his grace and Lady Catelyn beneath his roof. Bread and salt have been made ready. His lordship is gracious, Robb said. The man's eyes flicked to the bronze crown on Robb's brow, then away. He remembers old slights as old men will. Yet he has daughters enough and sons enough and halls enough, and says there's no use pissing in his own river over what's past. It was the sort of vulgar peace Walder Frey would offer the world when it suited him. Even so, some part of Catelyn had hoped for more bile, more open anger. Anger was simpler than courtesy, when courtesy came after injury. Walder Frey nursing wrath, she understood. Walder Frey smiling made her uneasy. Edmure rode up through the mud to Robb's left, his red-gold beard beaded with rain. His blue velvet had gone muddy at the hem, and he looked as if he had slept little and dreamed less. Did he say anything of Roslin? The Frey captain's mouth twitched. Whether in amusement or contempt, Catelyn could not tell. "The lady is within. Fair as a dawn, Lord Edmure died. All her sisters are green with envy, and half her brothers with relief that it's you she's betting." "No, Edmure me. Esteem, Edmure." Even Robb managed the shadow of a smile at that, though it did not reach his eyes. Edmure gave an uncertain laugh, the laugh of a man trying to feel lighter than he did. He had accepted the marriage bravely enough once the thing was laid before him. But Catelyn knew what it cost him, and what it cost Robb more dearly still. Broken vows had a way of demanding culmination in cruel mints. Jane should never have been part of this road, Catelyn thought, though she had come to like the girl despite herself. Young Jane Westerling had been left behind for good reason, under her mother's eye and far from this reconciliation. Robb had yielded that much to prudence, perhaps because war had finally taught him the taste of hard counsel, or perhaps because he too had looked toward the twins and felt the shape of danger there. Roose Bolton approached as the column slowed again. Rain made little impression on him. He seemed made for cold weather and dim light, his pale eyes dry and depthless as milk glass, his lips always carrying the faint suggestion of some private disappointment. He wore dusty pink beneath a travel cloak dark with water, and his gloved hands rested on the reins with a stillness that put Catelyn in mind of spiders. "His lordship means to be amiable," Bolton said in his soft, almost weary voice. "That bodes well." "Does it?" Catelyn asked. Bolton turned his head only slightly. "It bodes better than a shut gate." Robb glanced at him. "I need no lesson in the value of the crossing, my lord. We are here, are we not?" "No," said Bolton. "You need no lesson in value." It was a harmless answer, perhaps. Yet something in the way he said it sent a ripple of distaste through her. Roose Bolton had lost men at Duskendale, aye, but never so many as other lords lost under his command. His own strength seemed always to diminish more slowly than any neighbor's. He survived reversals with a composure that might have been admirable in another man. In him, it felt like calculation wearing patience for a mask. The reins slackened as they came beneath the shadow of the western keep. Men with pikes lined the gatehouse, and more watched from arrow slits above. Frey colors clung to the battlements like wet rags. Catelyn counted helms and crossbows, because she had learned to count such things as another woman counted candles in a set. More men than ceremony required, she thought. More than hospitality should need. Bread and salt were indeed waiting. A boy in Frey blue came forward holding a trencher and a silver bowl with both hands as if afraid of dropping either. His face was too young for treachery, but fear sat plainly on it, pale beneath the freckles. Catelyn broke the bread and tasted the salt. Beside her, Robb did the same. So did Edmure. Guessed right, she thought, feeling the grains melt on her tongue. There, let that hold. Grey wind would not cross the gate. The wolf stopped before the threshold, hackles high, and gave a low, rolling growl that made even seasoned men step back. He looked not at the gate itself, but up, toward the murder holes and the shadowed walkway above them. Then his jaws opened and he loosed a howl that seemed to scrape at the stone. Murmurs ran along the Frey line. "He'll not come in," said one of the guards. "He will if I command it," Robb said. "He will not," Catelyn said quietly. Robb turned to her. For a moment he was only her son, not a king, wet-cheeked and tired, with something raw behind the stubbornness. "Mother!" Listen to him. The wolf's yellow eyes never left the gatehouse shadows. They blazed with such pure refusal that Catelyn felt a foolish urge to listen with all her bones. A tall man with a lantern and a kennelmaster's ring of keys came trotting out, hatless in the wet. "My lords, if it please his grace, Lord Walder bids me show the beast to a pen. A wolf in the hall unsettles the ladies." Grey Wind snapped his teeth so close to the man's hand that the fellow yelped and nearly lost his lantern. Robb swore under his breath. "Sir Reynold," he called. Reynold Westerling brought his horse over at once. He looked scarcely older than Robb and far more openly angry, as he often did when Freys were involved. Rain clung to his dark lashes. "Your grace? Take Grey Wind. Stay close. If he'll not enter, let no man beat him into it." Reynold looked from the direwolf to the gatehouse, and then to Robb's face. Whatever he read there straightened him in the saddle. "I'll see to him. Choose men you trust." A pause. "I have them already." That, more than anything said yet, made Catelyn's fingers tighten on the reins. Men who trusted the air did not speak so. The inner yard smelled of wet hay, horse piss, and smoke dampened almost to death by rain. Frey servants hurried beneath awnings with baskets and jugs, while armored men stood where servants should have stood and watched where men ought not to have watched. High in the gallery windows, faces came and vanished. Some were smiles. Some did not. Lord Walder received them in a chamber so overheated that steam rose from cloaks and hair. He sat wrapped in furs atop a chair carved too large for his pinched frame, his thin throat folding into itself above a collar of ermine. Around him gathered a clutter of sons and grandsons, all eager as dogs near a chopping block. Lothar, smooth and smiling. Black Walder, hard-eyed and mean. Ryman, fleshy and red-cheeked. Others beyond counting. "My king," Walder said, drawing the title out like old taffy. "My lady daughter, my soon-to-be goodson. 7 save us, what weather to bring to a wedding. Yet if the gods piss on us, we must open our mouths, eh? Sit, sit. You've all gone lean on the road. The young wolf, not so young now though. Marriage does that to men, I hear." It was meant as a barb and landed as one. Catelyn saw it land in Robb's eyes and harden there into courtesy. "Lord Walder, I have come to make what amends I may." Walder's smile showed little yellow teeth. "Amends are well and good. I was saying so to Lothar only this morn. Bread and salt, apologies and daughters. That's how men mend a tear in the cloth. Let's hope the cloth holds this time." The room laughed because Walder Frey had spoken, and they were Freys. The sound was thin. Catelyn sat and endured, and all the while she felt the castle breathing around them. Stone, river, rain, watchfulness. There were too many eyes, too many armed men, too much silence underneath the talk. She looked once toward the narrow window. Beyond the glass and wet gray air, she could see the far shape of the other tower across the green fork, and below it, the river crawling black beneath the bridge. It came to her then, unbidden and absurd, that the twins looked less like a home than a trap built by patient hands over many years, waiting only for something hungry enough to step inside. The hours before a wedding should have carried a different sort of unease. Catelyn remembered her own, in Riverrun's bright halls and among women's hands and laughter, with music below and the sweet ache of fear that has joy folded inside it. The unease at the twins had no sweetness. It was a hard thing, thin as wire and drawn through every passage of the keep. The Freys knew how to perform welcome. Fires were built. Capons turned on spits. Jugs of mulled wine steamed along trestle tables. Servants brought dry rushes to chambers and hot water for washing, though the smell of river damp never left the stones. Harpers tuned strings. A septon fussed over candles in the chapel. Everywhere, provision. Everywhere, abundance. Yet Catelyn had spent too much of her life among castles and camps, not to sense where abundance was being used to cover hunger. She spent part of the afternoon with Edmure because he needed company and because Robb had been claimed by one obligation after another. Men came and went from his chambers in 2s and 3s, lords, captains, heralds, all with faces set carefully blank. Edmure pretended not to notice. "I am to marry a maid who has half the trident for brothers," he said, trying on the words as if they were new boots. "It seems only fair. Riverrun was crowded with sisters, and I escaped every one of them." "You escaped none," Catelyn said. "You have only grown older among them. That is no escape at all." He looked toward the rain-streaked window. "Do you think she'll hate me? Roslin?" He nodded. "For the bargain, for the haste, for being the man chosen because another chose differently." Catelyn laid a hand over his. "Girls have little say in such matters, and far too much practice in making peace with them. If she has sense, she will know you for a kinder fate than many." He smiled then, briefly and truly. "That sounds very much like something a sister says when she cannot promise beauty. I am told the girl is lovely. I have been told the same, by Freys." He grimaced. "I trust Frey praise less than Frey wine. Then trust your own eyes when the time comes." At that, he grew quiet, and after a moment his fingers turned beneath hers to squeeze once. "He blames himself still." Catelyn did not ask who. She had no need. Robb carried his mistakes more honestly than any king had the right to. Some men made a throne and then sat above their errors. Robb seemed only to feel them more sharply because the throne was his. He is young enough to blame himself, she said. Old men blame weather, or women, or the gods. Edmure huffed a laugh. Then perhaps the crown will age him faster. The words lingered after he left her, because there was truth in them she did not like. Rule had aged Robb. So had grief. The false deaths of Bran and Rickon. Sansa's marriage into the Lion's Den. Arya vanished like smoke. The execution of Rickard Stark. Necessary and ruinous both. Each thing had chiseled at him. Each thing had taught him that honor and victory were not twins, whatever songs might claim. Late in the day, she found him in the outer ward beneath an awning where the rain drummed steadily overhead. He stood with Brynden and 2 guards, looking not at the men drilling in the yard, but at a stack of wine casks newly rolled in from some storehouse. Their staves were dark with damp. A line of Frey servants and spearmen moved around them. "What is it?" she asked. Brynden glanced toward the casks. "Perhaps nothing. Your face says otherwise." "It says I dislike Freys," he replied. "That is no news to any man born this side of the Trident." Robb stepped out from beneath the awning into the rain as if he had forgotten it was falling. Water ran off the edge of his cloak in steady threads. "Sir Patrick says there are more men on the walls than he counted an hour ago. Lord Walder has many sons to impress," Catelyn said, though she did not believe it. "And many crossbows," Brynden added. He said it lightly, but not enough to hide the edge beneath. Catelyn followed his gaze again. One of the casks had shifted on the plank beneath it. For an instant, the wet wood gaped at the rim, and she saw not the dark neck of a bottle within, but the hard straight line of bundled quarrels. A servant shoved the lid tight and looked up too fast, catching her eye. He dropped his head at once and moved on. "Have you spoken of this to Walder?" she asked. Robb's mouth tightened, and said what? That his household arms too many guards for a wedding and stores too much drink? He would be insulted, loud, and perhaps genuinely so. If there is danger here, it does not serve us to show our fear before we know its shape. Brynden leaned on the pommel of his sword. "I can put 50 men on their mounts before moonrise, and have you clear of this dung heap by dawn. And leave the rest?" Robb asked. The Blackfish said nothing to that, because there were too many rests to leave. The greater host lay beyond the walls in camps stretched muddy and half dispersed. Not all would move together, not if the Freys chose to shut the bridge and fall on stragglers. The crossing was narrow. The roads behind were slow with rain. Retreat could become rout before sunrise. Reynolds says the kennelmaster asked after Grey Wind twice, Robb went on. Pressed him to bring the wolf to a pen nearer the outer wall. When Reynolds refused, one of Lord Walder's sons rode down himself to repeat the courtesy. "Ma, Enferdia." "Which son?" Catelyn asked. "Lothar," smiling all the while. That did not soothe her. Roose Bolton came into the yard as if conjured by the speaking of uneasy names. He crossed the rush-slick stone without seeming to hurry. A pair of men in flayed man surcoats behind him, and no expression at all upon his pale face. "Your Grace," he said. "The camps grow restless. The rain has made some of the Northmen surly." "The Northmen were born surly," Brynden said. Bolton ignored him. "A wedding and a generous table may mend tempers where a stern word will not." Robb studied him. "Do you advise trust, my lord?" "I advise appearances." Bolton's voice was soft enough to force the listener nearer. A host insulted beneath his own roof becomes dangerous in earnest, where before he may only have been vain. Only. The word was almost amusing. Catelyn looked at Bolton's hands. They were gloved, and very clean. And if vanity is the cloak worn over something worse? For the first time, his pale eyes touched hers. Then one must choose whether to tug the cloak aside in public. Men who do that sometimes discover they were wrong, and have made an enemy without cause. Sometimes, she said, they discover they were right. Bolton inclined his head, neither agreeing nor dissenting. As my lady says. When he had gone, Brynden spat into the rain. There is a man who would preach moderation to a corpse. Robb watched Bolton's retreating back a long while. I do not like how untouched he is. No more do I, said Catelyn. Not after Duskendale. Not after every mischance that strips another house more bare than his. Robb said nothing for a time. Then, very quietly, Grey wind has not settled since we came. He would not eat. That chilled her more than quarrels and casks had. Deerwolves were no more gods than other beasts, but they were older than men in some hard, deep way. They remembered what human bones forgot. The wedding bells began at dusk, not for the ceremony itself, but for all the smaller rites that led toward it. Their sound crossed the wet air in thin metallic waves. Fires were lit in the great hall, and song drifted out with the smoke. Men laughed. Somewhere in the outer yard a horse screamed. A little later, one of Catelyn's maids came to say that a serving girl in Frey colors had asked whether the Stark Queen Mother slept lightly. The message was strange enough to stop the blood in her for a moment. Where is she now? Catelyn asked. Gone, my lady. The guard said she was headed for the stables. Describe her. The maid did, poorly. Small. Brown hair. Frightened. Freckles, perhaps. One of 100 girls in any lord's service, yet the fear mattered more than the face. Catelyn found Robb in the corridor beyond the hall, speaking low with Daisy Mormont. The moment she told him, the air about him seemed to sharpen. Did she give a name? He asked. No. Brynden was summoned at once. So was Reynold. No alarm was raised. No cry went out. Robb only buckled on his sword belt beneath the fall of his cloak and said, Take lanterns. Not many. He did not say what she already knew, that frightened girls did not seek a queen mother on wedding eves unless the fear inside them had grown larger than whatever punishment might follow. Outside, the rain had begun again in earnest. The stables crouched low against the outer wall, their roofs glistening black with rain, their interior thick with the warmth of horses and the sour comfort of hay. Lantern light made islands of gold among the shadows. Somewhere a chain clinked. Somewhere else a man cursed softly as he sloshed through muck. They found the girl behind a stack of feed sacks, crouched in her skirts with both hands clapped over her mouth to stop the sound of her own breathing. She could not have seen 16 Naman days. Mud streaked her dress to the knee. One shoe was gone. When Reynold's lantern swung toward her, she flinched so hard she struck the boards behind her and almost cried out. I won't go back, she blurted before any of them had spoken. Please, don't take me back. I won't. I'd sooner drown. Robb knelt to bring his face nearer hers. In the lantern glow, his youth showed more plainly than his crown ever allowed, and perhaps that helped her. No one is taking you anywhere until we know why you run. Her eyes darted to Catelyn, then to Brynden, then back to Robb. They'll kill me if they know I told. Who? She swallowed. Then, the lords. The black one and the limping one and the pale one. I don't know all their names, only how they talk when they think a girl is part of the rushes. Manti. Nun. Demshi. Wan Mace. Lame Lothar. Catelyn thought at once. Black Walder. And the pale one? Roose. Or some other Frey spawn with too much milk in his face. The shape of dread inside her tightened. What did you hear? Robb asked. The girl stared at him as if measuring whether a king could be trusted with the sort of filth small people learn to survive by carrying. At last she said, They said the music would drown the first screams. They laughed about that. One said the old lord likes music loud enough to cover murder. Another said the lion song should do because it's fitting. Brynden's mouth went hard. The rains of Castamere. The girl looked at him in confusion. I don't know no song, sir. Only that the players are not all players. Some were in mail this morning when they came through the back stairs. Crossbows too. I saw them through the laundry room. They hid the quarrels in casks and under the gallery cloth. I heard them say to shut the doors when the kin's uncle is off to bed, and then... She stopped, breath sawing. Then what? Robb asked, but gently. Then loose on the wolf's men first, because Northmen die ugly. Then the king. Then the mother if she screams too much. They said Lord Walder wants her throat cut at last, so she stopped staring like a she-wolf. Catelyn had thought herself too seasoned to feel surprise any longer. Yet the words struck her with a force that numbed for a heartbeat. Not because Walder Frey wanted her dead, that she could imagine, but because the plan existed whole and spoken and near. Not as a vague unease or a shadow at the edge of instinct, but as a thing with sequence, with timing, with the nasty mundane detail of men arranging murder like table service. Reynold's hand closed around the hilt at his hip so hard his knuckles showed white. "Give me leave, your grace, and I'll cut Lothar out of his boots before the hall is warmed." "No," Robb said at once. The girl made a frightened sound. "There's more. In the camps, men with flayed men on their cloaks, and Frey men both. They've marked which tents hold the lords. The chains by the river gate are to be dropped when the horns sound, so your men can't rush the bridge altogether. And the wolf?" Her voice shook. "They said the wolf must be shot in his pen before the king hears him. Grey Wind was not penned." Catelyn felt a small, fierce pulse of gratitude for that. She glanced toward the yard, where through the open stable door she could see only black rain and a shifting lantern. Somewhere beyond, the dire wolf was waiting in his own rage. "Who told you this?" Brynden asked. "No one told me. I carried linens to the little hall above the old man's rooms. They were talking there. Lord Walder was laughing. Black Walder took hold of my arm when I passed and asked if I'd like to see a wolf dance. I said no, my lord, and he laughed more. And he laughed more." Tears brimmed at last, making her freckles gleam. "My brother's in the kitchens. If they know I've gone, they won't know from me," Robb said. She looked at him then, truly looked, perhaps seeing not the crown but the promise beneath it. "I only wanted to get clear before they barred the yards. I thought if I reached the river," she gave a helpless glance toward the dark beyond the stable. "I can't swim." "No one swims tonight," Catelyn said. Robb rose and turned away from them all. He did not pace. Pacing belonged to lesser tempers. He stood very still instead, one hand braced against a stall beam, rain whispering beyond him. Hoarse breath and lantern heat around him, and Catelyn watched the decision take shape inside his shoulders before it ever reached his face. "Who knows of this besides us?" he asked without turning. "No one," said Brynden. "Dacey suspects. Greyjohn suspects everything. That is not the same." "Munda. Then keep it so." He faced them again, and in his eyes there was none of the boy left now. "If we run, they fall on the camps and say we broke the peace. Half our strength will be cut to pieces trying to cross the ford roads in the dark. If we accuse them without proof before their own men, Walder screams insult and Bolton plays innocence, and we are no safer than before, only clumsier." "They have built a trap. Good. Let them step into it." Brynden looked at him in hard appraisal, then slowly nodded. "You mean to go to the feast?" "I mean to go armed. I mean to put men where they think there will be fools and drinkers. I mean to make them spend their quarrels on oak and mail instead of bare flesh. And I mean for Grey Wind to stay free." Catelyn heard herself say, "The gods help us," though she did not know whether it was prayer or merely witness. Robb looked at the girl. "What is your name?" "Kyra, my lord." "Kyra, you'll not return to service tonight. Sir Reynold will hide you where no Frey goes until I send word. Your brother, what is he called?" "Nah. Tom. We'll see him taken quietly from the kitchens if it can be done. If not, we take him when the fighting starts." "The fighting," she whispered as if the word itself might summon it sooner. "There will be fighting," Robb said. "Because men who plan murder under guest right do not stop because one girl grew brave." Something changed in her face then. Not ease. Ease was too distant. But a certain desperate relief that came from hearing terror named plainly by someone stronger than oneself. Brynden drew closer to Robb. "Who do you trust enough to tell?" Robb answered without hesitation. "You, my mother, Dacey." Great John and Small John. Wendell Manderly. If only because he'll laugh louder when afraid, and I want that laugh on our side. Sir Patrick, Mark Piper, Robin Flint, Owen Norrie. Reynold for the wolf. No more than we must. And Edmure? Robb's jaw tightened. Yes, he has to play his part and not miss a step. He will hate that. He can hate me later. The Blackfish's smile was knife-thin. Good. I was beginning to wonder whether you'd grown too kingly to be ruthless. I've had tutors, Robb said. The words were dry, but Catelyn heard the ache under them. Tutors indeed. Tywin Lannister with his armies in gold. Walder Frey with his injured pride. Balon Greyjoy from across the sea. Her own mistakes. His own. Every loss was a tutor, and all of them charged cruel fees. When they left the stable, the rain had softened to a hush. Grey Wind stood in the yard with water streaming from his muzzle, silent now. But the silence was worse than the growling had been. He looked at Robb and then at the hall windows glowing gold against the wet darkness. The wolf knew, Catelyn thought. Not by words, not by plots and names and promises sealed with wax, but by the old language of blood preparing itself. Robb laid a hand on the beast's neck. Soon, he murmured. Whether he spoke to Grey Wind or to the night itself, she could not tell. The room chosen for the council had no windows that faced the inner yard. That had been Bryndon's first demand. If they read lips from a gallery slit, he said, let them read the backs of our heads and guess at treason of their own. It was an old guard chamber on the lower level of the tower assigned to Robb's household, close enough to the stairs that men could come and go in pairs without attracting notice, and far enough from the main passages that drunken Freys were unlikely to blunder near. A brazier glowed dully in the corner, scarcely enough to warm the stones. Damp cloaks steamed. Steel clicked softly under cloth as those summoned slipped in one by one and stood waiting for the king to speak. Great John Umber filled more space than two ordinary men and made no secret of disliking whispers. He came in tugging a half-fastened doublet over ringmail, his great beard still wet, his one good eye bright as a coal. Small John, broad as a gate and younger by decades, had his father's size without yet having acquired his father's taste for thunder. Daisy Mormont entered with her hair braided tight, and no ornament save a knife on either hip. Wendell Manderly smelled faintly of spiced wine and roast goose, though his face sobered the instant he saw the others assemble. Mark Piper arrived smiling in the way young men do when danger sharpens them. Patrick Mallister's smile never came at all. Robin Flint and Owen Norrie were mountain hard and silent. Reynold brought the damp smell of the yard with him and stood near the door as if half of him remained outside with Grey Wind. Edmure came last, rosy from the hall fires and visibly annoyed until he saw Catelyn's face. Then the annoyance vanished, leaving only alertness and a flicker of hurt that his own wedding eve had taken such a turn. Robb let the door bar fall into place before he spoke. He did not raise his voice. The room leaned toward him all the same. Lord Walder means to murder us under his roof. No one exclaimed. No one laughed in disbelief. Grey John only bared his teeth. Daisy's eyes narrowed. Edmure swore once, fervently, under his breath. Wendell muttered, well, that saves wondering whether the betting will be the worst part. Nani. Robb laid out the girl's report in plain terms, wasting no time on ornament. Crossbows in the galleries, false musicians, the lion's song as signal, gates to be barred, Bolton men to fall upon the camps. He spoke of the wine casks and the quarrels, of Grey Wind marked for death, of Lothar and Black Walder and the old man laughing. He spoke until the thing sat in the center of the chamber like a carcass, and no one there could pretend not to smell it. Grey John hit the table with a fist that made the brazier spit. Then, by God's blood, let us carve their rotten hearts out now. And start the slaughter before our men are placed? Daisy asked. They are already placed for slaughter. Not if we move faster than they do, said Robb. Edmure stared at him. You still mean for me to wed the girl? I do. This is madness. This, Catelyn said, is the only way to keep the madness from swallowing the whole host. Edmure turned on her. By handing me over like bait? No, Robb said, "by making them believe they still hold surprise. The instant Walder knows we are warned, he shuts the bridge and gives the order anyway. Perhaps sooner, perhaps clumsier, but no less deadly." "Nay." Wendell rubbed a hand over his beard. "He has the walls. Bolton has men in our camps. If we cry out and rush the hall, every Frey with a bow looses into the yards and every cook with a cleaver says later, 'We were the Oathbreakers. Gods curse them.' It's neat enough." "Too neat," Patrick Mallister said grimly. "Which is why we must put our own edges to it." Robb nodded once. "Exactly." He drew the map closer. It was nothing more than a quick ink sketch on stiff parchment. 2 keeps, the bridge, gatehouses, outer yards, camp lines. But men who knew war could read death from simpler lines than those. Robb set his finger on the Great Hall. "The feast goes on. Greyjohn, Smalljon, Dacey, Wendell. You stay near me, but not all on one side. Eat. Drink, or seem to. Beneath your silks and wedding colors, wear mail. Keep knives easy and chairs clear for movement. When the musicians begin the lion's song, they mean to start. We start a heartbeat sooner if we can. If not, we weather the first volley, and then close. Tables are shields. Use them." "No. About time tables were good for something," Greyjohn muttered. "Patrek Mark, you keep men in the yard nearest the hall doors. No more than a few at first, chosen for speed and discipline. More wait by the stairs and the side passage, dressed as retainers. When you hear the horn, you break the side doors and take the galleries if they are not already ours." "Whose horn?" asked Mark. "Mine if I can give it. Bryndon's if I cannot." At that, Brynden touched the map where the bridge met the western keep. "I do not attend the feast." Edmure blinked. "You avoid my wedding to be useful?" "I avoid your wedding because wedding music is an abomination," Brynden said. "Utility is a pleasant second." Even Robb smiled faintly at that, but the smile vanished quickly. "Brynden remains outside with riders in the outer yard, and more in the camps," he said. "His excuse will be what it always is, impatience with lords, songs, and old men. He watches the gatehouse, the bridge mouth, and the kennel yard. If the gates close, he opens them or burns them. If Bolton's men move in the camps, he sounds 3 blasts and strikes at once. Maybe, Nabne, and Shay, Dama. Bama, they see or dab." Reynold leaned over the map. "Grey wind?" "With you," Robb said. "Not in any pen. 10 men you'd trust with your own blood stay at the kennels and the postern. If they come for him, kill them. If the fighting starts, loose him where the Freys thickest stand." Reynold's expression went sharp and savage with gratitude. "Gladly. Robb and Owen. You stay in camp among the Northmen. Quietly. Choose sober men and wake the sleepers nearest the lordly tents. No armor clatter. No raised voices. Tell them only this: keep steel close and wait for the horn. Any man too drunk to stand is moved out of the line of first quarrels if you can manage it without rousing suspicion." "No." Owen Norrie grunted agreement. Robb and Flint merely nodded once. "Edmure," Robb said then, and for the first time some strain showed plainly in his eyes. "You go through the wedding as if nothing is amiss." Edmure stared at him a moment, then looked away. "And when they lead me off to bed? When they shut me in some chamber with their daughter while crossbows sing in the hall? Then you keep the girl alive if she is innocent, and yourself alive regardless. The bedding party will be smaller than the hall. If Roslin knows nothing, she may help you. If she knows something." He let the rest hang. Catelyn saw the pain in Edmure's face. Not fear for himself, though there was that. Fear for the gentler possibility he had allowed himself in those last hours. The notion that his bride might be merely a frightened girl, not another knife in Frey silk. "I will not kill a woman because her father is a snake," Edmure said at last. "Nor would I ask it," Robb replied. "But you must be ready." Dacey had been listening with arms folded, her dark eyes moving from face to face. "What of Roose Bolton?" The chamber stilled. It was one thing to speak of Frey treachery, another to name Bolton within it. Yet the silence that followed was not startled so much as confirming. Too many men had already wondered. Robb's hand rested on the map but did not move. I do not accuse what I cannot prove. Not yet. But I mistrust him. If he is innocent, he will not thank me for caution. If he is guilty, caution is the only reason I may have his head before dawn. No. Greyjohn snorted. His head looks fit for a spike already. Then have patience, said Catelyn. Spikes do not sprout from stone. Wendell Manderly breathed out heavily. My lady, in White Harbor we say patience fattens the fish. Here I think it fattens the pike. Either way, said Brynden, it keeps still until the hook is set. There was a murmur of rough amusement at that, brief and welcome. Fear changed shape when shared among men who had chosen their ground. Robb looked to each of them in turn. I will not command any man here to stay who would rather cut his way from the castle now and chance the road. But if we do this, we do it together. The aim is not vengeance, not first. The aim is to survive the night with enough strength left to finish what they began. No one moved toward the door. Greyjohn planted both hands on the table and bent toward Robb. I've followed you since you were a green boy with your father's eyes. I'll not start doubting you because a weasel lord thinks himself clever. Me? Ay, said Smalljohn. Ay, said Dacey. The others followed, some gruffly, some with old courtesy, some in voices low enough to be almost private, but the word traveled the room and settled there like iron. Aye. When at last the council broke, Catelyn lingered while the others went to their places in disguises. Beyond the thick door, the castle sounded deceptively ordinary. Feet on stairs, laughter from some distant chamber. A burst of song gone quickly flat. Robb remained by the table, looking down at the inked lines until they blurred under the heat of the brazier. You have done this before, she said quietly. He glanced up. Planned an ambush? Carried fear without showing it. He smiled then, tiredly. Not well enough if you can see it. I have watched your face since before you could speak. There is very little in it I cannot see. For a moment, he was silent. Then he touched the map where the bridge crossed the river. I made my will before we turned west. She knew that, but hearing it in this hour made something inside her falter all the same. I remember. If I fall tonight, you will not. He did not contest the interruption, only went on. If I fall, the kingdom must not. Too much already has been left to chance and to my heart. There it was, the old wound. Jane die. Honor.I. Love. Mistake. Catelyn stepped forward and took his face between her hands as she had when he was little and feverish. His skin was cold. Your heart is not your shame, she said. Only your danger. He closed his eyes once, brief as a prayer. I wish Father were here. So do I. When he opened his eyes again, the boy was gone. The king returned in his stead. Then stand with me as if he were. Always. The bells rang for the wedding proper not long after. Men shouted cheerfully in the yards. Somewhere below, gray wind began again to howl. Ceremony was always shorter than dread made it seem. Roslin Frey came to the sept with tears standing in her eyes, and that alone almost undid Catelyn, because those tears were too raw to be artifice. The girl was as lovely as Edmure had been promised and more delicate than Catelyn liked to see on the edge of a bargain. She was slender, pale, and soft-mouthed, with a fall of brown hair hidden mostly beneath a maiden's veil and hands that trembled where they clasped the cloak around her shoulders. When Edmure turned to face her, some complicated thing passed over his features. Relief first, then pity, then the startled wonder of a man who finds that a duty laid on him in bitterness may yet carry a gentler face. The septon droned. Candles burned. Rain whispered faintly beyond the walls. Catelyn looked not at the joined hands but at the gathered kin. Walder's sons, Walder's grandsons, Freys by the dozens, their faces slick in candlelight. Some avid, some bored, some stiff with a tension they thought hidden. Lothar smiled often. Black Walder did not smile at all. Roose Bolton stood among the honored guests like a man attending a funeral early. When the vows were said, and the cloaks changed, and the old weasel's brood cheered loud enough to shake soot from the candles, Roslin looked once toward Catelyn. It was only an instant, but in it, Catelyn saw bewilderment, fear, and something like apology. Not knowledge. No, not knowledge. If the girl were part of the snare, she hid it better than any player at the court of the Eyrie. Catelyn did not believe that of her. The hall prepared for the feast with vulgar speed. Tables lengthened. Dishes appeared in steaming ranks. Minstrels struck up jigs. Wine flowed. Men shouted to one another across the chamber, as if joy could be manufactured by volume alone. Above them, the galleries ran dark except where candles touched the carved rails. There, too, figures moved in greater number than Catelyn liked. Robb had dressed simply for a king, in gray wool sewn with a white direwolf and a cloak lined with fur still damp at the hem. Beneath it, she knew, he wore mail light enough to hide and strong enough to turn a knife if the gods were not wholly asleep. Greatjon had discarded subtlety entirely, and come in a red-brown doublet stretched nearly to tearing over his armor. Dacey wore dark green, severe enough to pass for modesty and practical enough not to trip on. Smaljin had somehow made himself look a little drunk before the first cup. Wendell needed no effort there. He only had to temper what came naturally so that seeming and truth stayed close enough to suit their play. Walder Frey presided from his raised seat as a spider might preside over a web, with a little shuddering delight at every tremor. "Eee!" he cried. "Drink. If a wedding feast is not gluttony, it is only church with poorer music. Me. Ow." The hall obeyed. Boar and plum sauce, pike baked in crusts of salt and herbs, capons, lampreys, trenchers flooded with rich broth, Frey girls pouring wine, Frey boys darting between benches, the smell of grease and cinnamon and wet wool and rushes crushed under many boots. Robb played his part well. He offered Lord Walder the public apology agreed upon, dignified enough to satisfy the listeners, and humble enough to soothe the old man's vanity. Walder accepted it like a miser fingering coin, turning each phrase over before he would pocket it. Men laughed in the right places. Cups were raised. Edmure even managed to blush when one of the elder Freys shouted a lewd blessing for his bedding. Yet beneath all of it ran another current. Catelyn saw it in the way certain servants lingered near the hall doors without serving, in the way the musicians numbered more than the music required, in the hard line visible for an instant at a player's sleeve when he reached too high and his cuff slid back from mail, in the way Roose Bolton sat with his back comfortably to a wall and his left hand seldom far from the fold of his pink silk, in the way Black Walder kept looking toward the gallery stairs rather than the bride. Most telling of all, perhaps, was the chain glint Catelyn saw at Roose's wrist when he lifted his cup. Not jewelry. Mail.y. Her breath stopped in her throat. It was only an inch of linked steel, revealed and gone again between silk and glove, but it might as well have been a confession shouted. Across the table she met Robb's eyes and very slightly let her own drop to her wrist, then back. He did not so much as blink. Only his hand, where it rested beside his cup, curled once. Good, she thought. He saw. The feast swelled around them. Greatjon gave a booming laugh at something Smaljin said. Wendell demanded another platter of goose and was given one. Mark Piper sang 2 lines of a bawdy song too loudly, and was roared down by Freys eager to outbawdy him. For all the seeming disorder, Catelyn could feel the careful arrangement beneath. Their own men were where they must be. Patrek near the side door. Dacey with a clear path to Robb's left. Greatjon close enough to overturn half the dais if he chose. Reynold absent, as planned. Brynden absent too, and ostentatiously so. Walder had already made a snide remark about lords too proud for weddings. Edmure and Roslin sat hand in hand while the old lord's daughters pinched and giggled and whispered. Roslin's smile never reached her eyes. Once, when Edmure bent his head to hear her, Catelyn saw the girl's lips move quickly. Edmure looked at her with surprise, then gave the smallest nod. A word of warning? A plea? There was no way to know. At the high end of the hall, Walder called out for the bedding songs before the bride and groom had half finished eating. The room erupted in cheers rough enough to curdle milk. Roslin went white. Edmure looked between embarrassment and outrage. "Must we?" he asked upward. Walder cackled. "My son, if you've never seen a woman undressed by a hall full of cousins, you have not lived." That drew more laughter. Catelyn saw Robb's mouth thin with disgust. Good. Let disgust sharpen him. The bedding began in noisy disorder. Women clustered around Roslin. Men seized Edmure's sleeves. Greyjohn bellowed some absurd blessing involving trout and nets. For an instant, the whole hall shifted, bodies standing, benches scraping, attention dragging toward the bride's tears and the groom's protesting dignity. It was the perfect moment for murder. Disorder in plain sight. Movement enough to mask deliberate placement. A king separated by custom from the uncle who might otherwise stand between him and a quarrel. Catelyn rose with the others. As she did, she saw Lothar Frey make a little motion with 2 fingers toward the musicians' gallery. The first note came thin and reedy. The second fuller. Then the strings and pipes together found the melody, slow and unmistakable. The Rains of Castamere. Several Freys grinned before they could stop themselves. Catelyn heard a chair leg scrape beside her. Heels on stone above. The soft rattle of hidden metal. And through it all, far off but very clear, the savage answering howl of gray wind from the yard below. Robb did not wait for the third measure. He flung his wine cup hard into the face of the nearest musician and shouted, "Now!" The first volley broke over the hall like hail striking a shield wall. Hard, sudden, shocking in its noise, even when expected. But expectation was the difference between massacre and battle is a thing men can answer. The cup struck the musician in the nose and burst wine and blood together. At that same heartbeat, Greyjohn Umber heaved the bench before him into the air. It turned half sideways as quarrels hissed down from the gallery and took the bolts that would have found Robb's chest and Wendell's face. 2 shafts punched through the wood almost to the feathers. Another skipped off Dacey's hidden mail with a shower of sparks and a grunt. Men screamed. A Frey girl dropped a flagon and it shattered at Catelyn's feet, red wine running through rushes that were already darkening with other red. Robb was on his feet with steel in hand before the echo of his shout died. Grey wind's howl came again through the stone, nearer now, and answered by the roaring of men at the tables as the North and River Lords rose all at once from seeming drunkenness into terrible sobriety. "Guessed right," Catelyn heard herself cry, and then she was moving. She did not think. Thinking would have brought with it all the impossibility of the thing, all the years of custom and horror. Instead, she saw Walder Frey beginning to push himself back from his high seat, with his old face twisted in delight and fear, and gave herself to instinct. She took 2 steps up the dais, seized the old man's collar in one hand, and dragged the knife from the board where it had been left beside the roast. The blade came to his throat just as he began to squeal. "Stop this!" she screamed into his face. "Stop this now, or I open you where you sit." No one stopped. That was answer enough. On the floor below, Roose Bolton had risen with astonishing speed. Silk fell from his forearm as he drew a long dagger and came at Robb not with a shout or curse, but in that same awful quiet he brought to every room. Yet Robb had been waiting for him more than for any Frey. He turned at the movement, and the dagger meant for his belly skidded across hidden mail with a metallic rasp. Robb slammed his elbow into Bolton's jaw and drove his sword toward the man's side, but Bolton twisted away with a grace too smooth to be chance. The blade bit only cloth and flesh, not deep enough. Smaljun hurled himself between them as a second volley came from the gallery. One quarrel punched through his neck. Another struck his shoulder. He gave no sign of feeling either, only seized the table's edge and ripped it upward into a shield wall while roaring fit to split the rafters. Wendell Manderley was not so lucky. He had half turned to reach for a fallen shield when a bolt caught him beneath the ear. For an instant, his expression was almost comically puzzled. Then he toppled sideways into a heap of trenchers and roasted apples, his blood running bright over the goose he had only just demanded. Daisy Mormont reached the gallery stair before the second musician could loose. She came up it like stormwater through a breach, one hand on the rail, the other working short steel with the calm efficiency of a butcher who wastes no cut. The first false singer died with his crossbow still half raised. The second she kicked backward into a harper, and both went down in a tangle of strings and limbs. Behind her, Mark Piper and Patrick Mallister burst through the side door with men at their heels, axes and swords in their hands, faces white with fury. Greyjohn's bench smashed into 3 Freys at once. One went under the legs and did not get back up. Another lost teeth enough to strew the rushes. The third reeled straight into Smalljohn's wounded bulk and disappeared beneath him with a shriek. "Umbers!" Greyjohn thundered. "Who wants another song?" A Frey knight answered by lunging from the lower table with a dagger. Greyjohn caught his wrist, broke it with an audible crack, and drove the man face first into a platter of lampreys. The hall had become a world of overturning trestles, shrieking women, bolts splintering in wood, men slipping in grease and blood, and above it the obscene persistence of the minstrel's tune as the last few tried in panic to keep playing the signal, even while dying for it. Catelyn held Walder so tightly his fur collar tore in her fist. He smelled of piss already. "Call them off!" He made a bubbling noise. "Loose," he gasped. "Loose, you mad bitch, I can't." "You can. Or you can drown in your own blood before your grandsons." Now. Below, Robb drove Bolton backward among overturned cups and benches. Their blades rang once, twice, then vanished in the crush as Frey men surged between them. Black Walder came in from the right with a longsword and murder plain on his face. He might have reached Robb's back if not for Daisy dropping from the gallery rail straight onto him. They hit the floor hard enough to crack crockery. Black Walder rolled fast, swifter than Catelyn would have thought possible in armor, and his sword slashed Daisy's sleeve open from elbow to wrist. She answered with her dagger under his gorget. Not clean, not killing, but enough to send him staggering. Another bolt flew and buried itself in the paneling inches from Walder's head. "Your sons are shooting at you," Catelyn hissed. That, at least, seemed to move him. "Hold," the old man screeched with what breath he had. "Hold, you bloody fools, you'll kill me." Some did halt. Some could not hear. Some had no wish to. Robb saw Catelyn on the dais with Walder and used the shock of it. "Take him!" he shouted to Greyjohn. "Alive!" Smalljon, blood pouring black down his beard, heaved the bench aside and charged like an aurochs through the Freys nearest the stairs. Greyjohn followed with an oak leg gripped like a club. The dais shook under their weight. Catelyn shoved Walder toward them, and Greyjohn caught the old lord by the scruff and hoisted him half from the floor as easily as another man would seize a troublesome child. "Got your weasel," Greyjohn boomed. Roose Bolton vanished in that same instant, swallowed by the chaos. Catelyn saw only the flare of dusty pink slipping toward the side passage as Frey guards closed around him. Robb lunged after, but Smalljon stumbled with a bolt through his collar and nearly fell across him. Robb caught him with one arm. "Leave me," Smalljon rasped. "Not likely." He dragged the bigger man enough to get him behind the shattered table just as another bolt snapped from above and buried itself in the wood where his face had been. Smalljon laughed wetly. Almost. The sound that followed was not laughter at all, but gray wind crashing through the outer doors. The wolf must have come in with Patrick's men or broken a latch no human hand could have managed. He hit the nearest Frey from behind and took half the man's throat away before anyone had room to understand what moved among them. Then he was over the benches and into another, and another, all teeth and mud and blood and white eyes flashing in the hall fire. Panic changed shape at once. Men who had been bold with crossbows and closed doors were not bold when a direwolf came for their faces. "Back!" someone shrieked. "No, forward!" shouted another. Neither order held. With gray wind sowing horror and Dacey clearing the gallery, the balance broke. Not cleanly. Not at once. But the shape of the room shifted. The Freys had counted on helpless prey, and found instead armed men, half maddened by treachery and given a monster for a vanguard. Robb used the moment like a swordsman uses an opening. He thrust through the ribs of a Frey guard reaching for Smaljan, ripped the blade free, and climbed over the wreck of the lower table toward the side passage where Bolton had fled. "Patrick!" he shouted. "With me?" Patrick came at once. So did Mark, face splashed red, not his own. Behind them, Greyjohn was dragging Walder backward from the dais, while Catelyn snatched up a fallen crossbow and pointed it not very skillfully, but with sufficient conviction at any Frey who thought to rush them. The music finally failed. One harp gave a discordant twang and went silent. Into that silence came sounds from outside the hall. Horns, shouting, steel on steel, and beneath all of it the river wind carrying battle from the yards. The slaughter Walder had ordered had not been contained to one room after all. Outside, the night had teeth of its own. Brynden Tully had been in the yard when the first clash from the hall rolled through the stone like thunder trapped indoors. He heard the beginning of the lion's song, then the abrupt break in it, then the unmistakable racket of men no longer pretending at celebration. The horn in his hand was already half lifted. He blew one long blast and saw Frey guards at the gatehouse turn in alarm. He blew the second while mounting in a single hard motion. By the third, his riders were in their saddles and spurring through mud toward the bridge mouth. Reynold needed no horn. The hall's first scream had set Grey Wind lunging so violently against the leash that two men would not have held him. Reynold cut the strap himself. "Go!" The direwolf went like an arrow loosed from a giant's bow. The kennelmaster died before he took 3 steps. One of the archers posted above the yard managed a single wild shot that smashed on stone. Another toppled from the parapet with Grey Wind hanging from his forearm and clawing for his face. Reynold never even looked up. He and his chosen men were already moving to the postern, shoving the little gate wider, shouting the warning down the line of tents where Northmen slept in armor, half-buckled and dream-heavy. "Wake! Wake, you wolf-blooded bastards, wake!" The first of Bolton's men came then, exactly as the serving girl had said they would, slipping between tent ropes with knives and short spears. Red flayed men darkened the rain. But they came upon men who were waking to a horn, not to a blade at the throat. Robin Flint rose from his blankets with sword in hand. Owen Norrie split a skull with a camp axe before the owner had finished cutting through canvas. All along the camp there burst into being small brutal islands of fight. One lantern kicked over into mud, one pot boiling over, one man strangling another among bedrolls, then 5 more from either side piling in. "Bolton!" someone screamed in outrage, and once the name was loose it traveled faster than command. Bolton. Treason. That was useful. Betrayal spoken aloud made men savage. Brynden hit the first knot of Freys by the gatehouse as they were trying to lower the chain meant to pen the yard. His horse smashed one aside. His sword took another across the mouth. Behind him came Mallister riders and river knights, cloaks streaming, hooves sending up fans of black water. A Frey spearman caught a horse in the chest and went down under its fall. Brynden was through before the man's scream ended, driving toward the bridge mouth where more guards boiled out of the tower with pikes. "Take the winch," he shouted. "If they close the bridge, we're pissing uphill." Patrick's younger cousin, a quick boy named Louis, leaped from the saddle to the wall stair and vanished upward with 3 men at his back. The winch house above the chain was no place for mounted work. Below, Brynden hacked and cursed his way through a press of Freys who had expected a drunk old trout and found instead the blackfish in battle, which was a different creature altogether. Across the yard, Grey Wind tore through the rear rank of archers as if their leather jerkins were made of wet leaves. Men broke from him by instinct. Those who ran straight were pulled down. Those who climbed were dragged back. Torchlight flashed on wet fangs and made his muzzle seem painted to the eyes. Reynold lost 2 men in the first rush and gained the rest of the yard because no one wanted to stand where the wolf had just stood. The camps beyond were worse chaos, all muck and canvas and men blundering out half-armed into quarrels meant for sleeping bodies. Yet readiness mattered there too. Robin Flint's warning had spread in quick, brutal circles. Norreys and Flints and Umbers and Manderly men alike came awake cursing and fought where they lay rather than dying puzzled. Bolton's levies, for all their numbers, had counted on silence and found bedlam instead. Some still killed. Too many still killed. But surprise bled away with every shout of treason and every horn blast from the yard. A tent near the center of the Northmen's line went up in sudden flame where a torch had been thrown onto oiled canvas. For a moment, the whole camp flickered orange under rain and smoke. In that false dawn, shapes became visible that had hidden well in darkness. Flayed men advancing in ordered ranks. Frey spearmen trying to wheel left toward the bridge. Mounted riders uncertain, whose command to heed now that secrecy was ashes. "On me!" Reynold shouted, though he had no right to command half the men who followed him. They followed anyway because command at such moments belongs to whoever is loud enough and brave enough and moving toward the place where death is thickest. He saw Sir Hostine Frey in the yard, red-faced and roaring, trying to rally crossbowmen around a cart of spare quarrels. Reynold spurred directly at him. Hostine got his own horse between them and came on with a mace. Their first impact nearly unhorsed them both. Hostine was the stronger man and knew it. Reynold was the faster and knew that too. He took the mace blow on his shield, felt wood crack, and slid his sword under Hostine's guard to score a bright line across his thigh. Hostine bellowed and swung again. Gray wind hit his horse from the side, and the beast went over shrieking. Reynold barely turned in time to see a quarrel coming. It struck him under the arm where the shield had shifted. He grunted, more in anger than pain, and clung to the saddle by instinct. "Sir!" one of his men cried. "I'm not dead," Reynold snarled. "Kill the bastard who thought I was." The bridge mouth changed hands twice in less than a minute. Frey spearmen surged. Mallister riders broke them. Bolton men arriving from the campsite stabbed at the horses' flanks. Brynden carved through one knot only to find another behind. Rain made footing treacherous. Men slipped on stone wet with river and blood alike. A body toppled from the parapet into the green fork and was gone at once, swallowed by black current. Then a door burst from the hall side and Robb came out into the yard with Petrek and Mark and 6 more at his back. All of them blood-spattered, all moving with the grim forward momentum of men who had escaped one death and intended to ruin another. "Bridge!" he shouted. Brynden heard and laughed harshly even while parrying a spear. "Where else?" Robb caught up a shield from a dead man and plunged into the melee without waiting for a horse. Gray Wind saw him and turned at once, as if the wolf's rage had shape only when it had his king at the center. Together they hit the flank of the Freys trying to hold the tower stair. Human courage bends strangely before a direwolf. Men who might have braced against Robb's sword alone broke when yellow eyes and blood-slick fangs came with it. Somewhere in the camp beyond, Great John Umber's voice rose like a war horn made flesh. Catelyn would later learn he had dragged Walder all the way to the hall threshold before handing the old man over to Dacey's wounded but unshaken grip and plunging back into the yard with an axe in each hand. At the time, Robb heard only the roar and knew by it that Great John still lived. That was enough. On the far edge of the yard, flayed men were gathering in a deliberate wedge, not Freys now, but Bolton's proper. Armored better and moving with the ugly discipline of men, long trained to do cruel work in silence. At their head rode one of Roose's captains, lantern light making his pale pink surcoat gleam wetly. "There!" Petrek panted, seeing them too. "Hey," said Robb. "There." He did not feel fear then, not in any way he would have named. Only narrowing. Everything unnecessary fell away. The wedding, the music, the old man's insults, the long road north and south. All of it shrank until there remained only this yard, this bridge. These men who had believed they were coming upon butchered wolves and found wolves with steel and memory enough to answer. He lifted his sword and charged the wedge. The wedge broke not because Bolton men lacked courage, but because they had never expected to meet the king, they meant to betray blade to blade in the yard of another man's treason. Robb struck the first with his shield and the second with his sword. Patriarch took a spear in the side and snapped the shaft off rather than stop. Mark Piper slipped in blood and came up under a Bolton guard's arm with a knife. Grey wind crashed into the line where pikes should have held and turned ordered discipline into flinching terror. Brynden came in from the left with 3 riders, blades red to the wrists. The yard became too crowded for ranks and too murderous for finesse. Roose Bolton was not among the wedge. Robb saw that almost at once and hated himself for the spark of disappointment it brought. Then he heard shouting from the stair that led toward the bridge house chambers, and turned. Edmure Tully came down those steps with a sword in one hand and a torn wedding cloak hanging from his shoulder. 2 Frey men tumbled behind him, one clutching a bleeding ear, the other trying and failing to keep his footing on the wet stone. Roslin was with him, not dragged, not sobbing, but running pale and barefoot with her skirts bunched in both hands. Her veil was gone. Her hair streamed down her back, dark with rain. "They locked me up with 3 cousins and a wineskin," Edmure shouted, as if explaining himself in the middle of war were the most natural thing in the world. The bride bit one. Roslin's face might have denied the words had not blood marked her lip. "He struck me first." For one absurd second, amid mud and corpses and torch smoke, Robb nearly laughed. "Behind us," he called. Roslin did not argue. She dropped to seize a dagger from a dead guard's belt first, then ran where told. That told Catelyn more of her innocence than tears had. Daisy Mormont appeared from the hall side with a strip of cloth tied hard around her forearm, and Walder Frey's old bodyguard disarmed before her. Greatjon loomed at her shoulder, carrying Walder himself as if the old lord were a sack of wet oats. Walder kicked feebly. "Found your weasel trying to piss himself behind the dais," Greatjon announced. "Twice, I think." "Set him down where he can see," Robb said. Walder was dumped against a rain barrel so roughly that his cap came off and rolled away in the mud. He blinked, sputtered, looked around at the yard full of dead and dying Freys and Northmen and Riverlords, and for the first time since Catelyn had known him, seemed honestly uncertain what words could save him. "Roose," Robb said. Walder's eyes flicked, too quickly, too involuntarily, toward the covered bridge. Robb saw an eye. So did Brynden. "Bridge house," the Blackfish snapped. "With me." The bridge of the twins was no place for a pursuit. Narrow, slick, and roofed in places, it turned combat mean. Men could not swing well in close press. They had to thrust, shove, and kill ugly. Brynden went first because he trusted his feet and had no wish to let Robb take every risk available in one night. Robb followed because he was king and because Roose Bolton had already reached too far into his war. Bodies lay on the bridge boards, Frey and Stark alike, some still groaning. Rain blew in through the arrow slits and made black mirrors of the planks. Ahead, at the mouth of the water tower, a knot of Bolton guards was trying to force open the inner door, while one of them hammered on it with a sword hilt. "Open!" he was shouting. "Open for Lord Bolton." Brynden's answer was to put an arrow through his neck from 15 paces. The man fell backward against the barred door, hands clawing uselessly at the shaft. The rest turned. The fight there was short and merciless. There was no room for anything else. One Bolton guard went over the low side opening with Greatjon's axe in his chest. Another managed to thrust at Robb and scored his thigh before Patrick split his helm. Then the inner door gave inward all at once, and Roose Bolton himself stood revealed in the torchlit threshold, a sword now in hand and 3 more men behind him. He had shed all pretense of surprise. Blood from the cut on his side darkened the silk under his arm. His pale eyes moved over them, measuring distance, loss, possible escape. In another life, Catelyn thought later, he might have made a maester for the way he loved cold calculations more than men. In this life he had chosen lordship and flaying, and the old northern game of waiting for weakness to call itself opportunity. "Your Grace," Roose said, as if greeting Robb at some dull council table. "You were not meant to hear the song so early." Robb's sword point steadied on his chest. Jaime Lannister sends no regards tonight. Bolton's lips twitched. No, he sent promises instead. As do all great lords when lesser men make themselves useful. Lesser men, Brynden said, bleed the same. One of Bolton's guards rushed then, perhaps from fear of waiting. Greyjohn killed him before the charge had fully become a strike. The man crashed into the doorframe and slid down it. The others hesitated. Roose did not. "You have lost the river," he said to Robb, almost conversationally. "You have lost Winterfell. Your sisters are stolen. Your brother's dead. Your bannermen thinned and mutinous. You wear a crown of bronze in a world that mints gold. Was I meant to die for your boys' war, because you could win one battle for every 3 kingdoms against you?" Robb took one step forward. "You were meant to keep faith." "Faith," Roose said, and now the distaste came through at last. "Faith is a luxury for men whose fathers leave them secure." He moved then. Swift as the snake people always compared to better creatures. The sword in his hand darted for Robb's face. Robb knocked it wide. Brynden slashed low. Roose retreated 2 paces into the chamber, using the doorway to narrow them. He was better than Robb had thought. Not stronger, not fiercer, but clever in the old murderous way, choosing angles and retreating only to turn. Yet blood loss is a poor ally. So is isolation. Roose had expected a hall full of corpses and his own knife in the king's heart before anyone outside knew to shout. He had not expected to stand on Whetstone with the king alive, the blackfish at his shoulder, Greyjohn in the doorway, and the direwolf's claws scraping closer across the boards. Grey wind came into the chamber, low and silent. For the first time, Roose Bolton's composure truly cracked. It was only in the eyes, only for a heartbeat, but it was there. Fear stripped the frost from him and showed the animal beneath. He gave ground. Greyjohn's axe took one of the men behind him. Patrek engaged the second. Roose tried to turn that confusion into escape, twisting toward a narrow stair that dropped to the riverside postern. Robb cut across him and their blades locked, close enough now that Robb could smell the iron blood under his silks. "You sold the North for a title," Robb said through his teeth. Roose's answer was a hard jerk of steel and a knee toward Robb's wound. Robb shifted late. Pain lanced his thigh. Roose almost slipped free. Then Grey wind lunged. The direwolf did not take Roose's throat. Armor and reflex saved that. But the weight of him slammed Bolton sideways into the wall with enough force to knock the sword from his hand. Brynden's pommel struck his temple. Greyjohn's boot pinned his chest before he could recover. "Alive," Robb said at once, because Greyjohn's axe was already lifting. Greyjohn made a disgusted noise that echoed in the stone chamber, but he lowered the blade. "You keep him? I want every man in the realm to hear from his own mouth what he's done." Roose, dazed and bleeding, smiled a little through split lips. "Do you think truth matters that much?" "No," said Robb. "I think names do." They bound him with the belt torn from his own sword and a length of curtain cord. Patrick found, on one of the dead guards, a leather packet sealed with yellow wax impressed by a lion. Another seal beneath it bore the flayed man. Brynden looked at the packet, then at Roose. "Well, there's your song in writing." Robb took it but did not open it there. When they returned across the bridge to the western yard, dawn was still hours away. Yet the blackness of the night had thinned into that colder shade that precedes morning. The rain had nearly stopped. Steam rose from horses and men alike. Fires guttered in puddles. Frey resistance was collapsing in pockets. Some still fought, some fled, some threw down weapons once word spread that Walder and Bolton both were prisoners. Catelyn stood in the yard near the hall door with Roslin beside her, and Walder huddled under guard, looking less a lord than a filthy old bird fallen out of its nest. Roslin turned when Edmure reached her and did not step back. She looked at him as if astonished to find him alive. "I did not know," she said at once, before any accusation could come. "On my mother's soul, I did not know." I heard only enough to fear there was wickedness in the hall. They would not tell me anything. They never tell me anything." Edmure touched her shoulder. "You bit a cousin for me. He was grabbing at my laces. That's almost wifely." To Catelyn's weary shock, Roslin gave a broken laugh. It ended almost immediately in tears, but the laugh had been real. Greyjohn hauled Roose Bolton forward and dropped him in the mud before Walder Frey. The old man made a small, horrified noise. "There," Greyjohn said. "2 weasels in 1 yard. Is it a mating season?" Walder's eyes darted from Roose to Robb and back again, quick as rats. "You can't," he began. "You can't mean to. There was guessed right, bread and salt. All the gods saw." "All the gods saw," Catelyn said, "and so did I." Walder tried to shrink into himself. For once, there was nowhere left to hide. Morning came gray and merciless. The rain stopped only when it had washed most loose blood into the drains and left the rest in dark, rusty fans upon the stone. Mist rose from the green fork. Crows gathered on the battlements with the smug patience of creatures who have never needed to plot for what they eat. In the outer yard, men moved among the dead with that exhausted care that follows battle, rolling bodies, identifying faces, separating friend from foe by surcoat, by beard, by the shape of a ringed hand. There were too many friends. Catelyn walked among them because it seemed an obscenity to remain by the fire while others bent over those who had died under her son's protection. Wendell Manderley lay beneath a cloak near the hall steps, a quarrel still lodged where it had gone in under the ear. Someone had closed his eyes. His great hands, once so often wrapped around trenchers and cups, were folded awkwardly over his belly. Small Janumber lay not far off, broader even in death than many living men, bolts removed from him, but their wounds impossible to mistake. Greyjohn knelt beside his son without speaking. No tears showed on his face. The absence of them was terrible. Daisy Mormont lived, though maesters stitched her arm and muttered over a deep cut at her side. Patriarch Mallister lived as well, pale and clenching his jaw while an arrowhead was drawn from his flesh. Reynold Westerling had the quarrel under his arm removed before sunrise and cursed so richly through the doing of it that even the men holding him began to grin. Owen Norrie survived with a broken hand. Robin Flint survived with half an ear gone. Many lesser men, nameless to the songs, did not survive at all. Their dead lay in lines under blankets still damp from the road. Guessed right had been broken. Whatever else the realm might say of crowns and rebels and kings, there would be no wiping clean that stain. Catelyn knew enough of men to know some would try. Tywin Lannister would call it necessary. Freys who lived would call it confusion or defense. Maesters in distant towers would set quill to parchment and write of politics, of outcomes, of the clever turning of war. None of them had watched a son fall shielding his king at a wedding feast. None of them had heard music used as a knife. Robb had not slept. When Catelyn found him at last, he stood in a chamber overlooking the river, the leather packet from Roose Bolton open on the table before him. Brynden stood opposite. Edmure had come too, washed and red-eyed. Roslin wrapped in one of Catelyn's cloaks and seated near the hearth with both hands around a cup she did not drink from. Greyjohn came later, filling the room with silence more than noise. He had left Small John to the women and had not spoken a word since. Robb looked up as Catelyn entered. The night had put something older into his face again, but with it came a steadiness she had not seen there in many months. He had been forced into clarity and had not flinched from it. "There is your proof," he said, touching the letter. She read enough to feel no need of more. Tywin Lannister's hand was not there, but his will was plain in every line. Promises of the Wardenry of the North to Roose Bolton. Promises of lands and honors to House Frey. Assurances of royal favor under King Joffrey. One letter from Lothar to Bolton, careful in its phrasing but not careful enough. Spoke of the musicians, the bridge, the wolf. Another from the Lannister side named the Late Hour, at which the Wolf King would trouble them no more. Quills could indeed win battles. They could also hang men. Edmure read over Robb's shoulder and swore very softly. Roslin covered her mouth as if she might be sick. "I did not know," she whispered again. Bryndon's face softened a fraction. "Girl, no one here thinks you wrote the letters. But they are my blood." "So is he," Catelyn said, and put a hand on Edmure's shoulder. "Blood is a road, not a command." Roslin looked at her then with the startled gratitude of one who expected only suspicion. It was impossible not to pity her. Whatever else the night had made of the Freys, she remained a girl given in marriage to mend a breach her father meant to answer with murder. No oath she had sworn could bind her to that. Greyjohn took the letters last because he cared least for ink. His huge fingers looked foolishly delicate holding the parchment. He thrust it back onto the table after 3 lines. "Hang them." "Which?" Brynden asked. "There are more Freys in these towers than crows on a corpse." "All who knew, and all who did not," Robb said. Greyjohn glared at him. "If a nest breeds vipers, we kill vipers, not eggs," it was said quietly, but Greyjohn heard in it something that made him stop. He looked at Robb long and hard. "My son lies dead downstairs." "I know." "Do you?" The room went still. Even the hearth seemed to quiet itself. Robb stepped around the table until he stood within arm's reach of the older lord. "Smaljan died for me. Wendell died for me. Men whose names the singers won't remember died because they followed me into this hall. If I answer that by murdering children in their cradles and women at their prayers, then all of the Freys did was teach me to wear their skin." Greyjohn's jaw worked. He looked older then than he had beside his son's body. "I asked for blood, not babes. You asked for all." Greyjohn's voice roughened. "Maybe I did." Brynden exhaled through his nose and leaned on the table. "Then let us have sense with the blood. Walder, Lothar, any son or grandson we can prove took part. Roose Bolton. The captains who struck in the camps. The rest disarmed, bound, held for oaths and ransoms, or sent back shamed if they are women and children. We cannot butcher a whole house and pretend justice. But neither can we leave the head on a serpent because we Roslin flinched at the word head. Edmure's hand found hers and stayed there. Catelyn watched Robb as he listened. This was the true test. Not steel and shouts and sudden death, but the long, cold business of deciding what vengeance becomes when a king touches it. He turned away to the window. Below, gray wind moved among the yard's edges, nosing the dead, watchful still. The wolf did not look triumphant. Beasts were spared that folly. He looked only alert, as if the night might bite again. "At dawn tomorrow," Robb said at last, "we assemble every captive lord and captain in the outer yard. The letters are read aloud. Walder and Roose face their own men. Those named in the plot stand judgment before gods and men. I will not kill them in secret as they planned for me." "Me. Too gentle," Greyjohn muttered. "Too public," Brynden countered, and there was some approval in it. "Public is the point," Robb said. "Every house in the realm will hear what was done here. Not rumor. Witness. We send ravens to River Run, Seaguard, White Harbor, Harrenhal, the Vale if they'll read us. Every major holdfast of the river and the north. Tywin Lannister bought this slaughter. He can deny it with a straight face to men who love gold. Let us make the denial expensive." "Nani?" Edmure looked down at Roslin's hand in his. "And the crossing?" "We hold it," Brynden said before Robb could. "By every trout and wolf we can spare until the Frey castles yield outright or their garrisons agree to new terms." "New terms," Roslin repeated faintly. Edmure gave a short, humorless laugh. "Wife. It seems your family's notion of alliance has been revised." She ought perhaps to have shrunk from the word wife, given the night. Instead, she went very still, then lifted her chin a little. "If you mean to cast me off, say it plain. I will not beg." "None." Edmure blinked. "Cast you off? Woman, you bit my cousin and helped me out of a locked chamber. He was your cousin too. He was being tiresome." Against all reason, Catelyn nearly smiled. So did Robb, very slightly. "No one is casting you off," he said. "You are Lady of Riverrun now, if Edmure has the wit to deserve you." Roslin looked from one face to another, as if still unsure whether mercy could truly exist in a room like this. At last, she bowed her head over their joined hands. It was not joy. Joy would have been a blasphemy in that hour. But it was the first shape of loyalty, perhaps, or the first fragile plank laid over a river no one had chosen. Later, when the judgments were made in the yard, Walder Frey denied everything until the second letter was read aloud, and Roose Bolton's own seal stared up from the parchment for all to see. Then he tried another path and called it necessity, and then another and called it the king's fault, and then another and called on Guest, right as if it were his protection rather than his crime. Roose said very little. He looked over the gathered men with that same pale disdain he had worn in life's safer rooms, and only once spoke at length, when Robb asked whether he had anything to say before sentence. "You were too young to keep what you'd won," Roose said. "The realm knew it before you did." "And now?" Robb asked. Roose's eyes, cold and colorless, moved once to the line of Northmen standing armed around the yard, to Greatjon, to Dacey, to Brynden, to Grey Wen sitting silent at Robb's heel. "Now," he said, "the realm will make another bargain." "Perhaps," Robb said, "but not with you." Walder wept. Roose did not. Lothar cursed. Black Walder bled where Dacey's knife had opened his throat too deep to mend and spared them the trouble of further hearing. Some captains were hanged before noon. Others were locked in irons to await transport or ransom. Walder and Roose were kept alive under guard because Brynden was right about use, and because death is a short answer where politics crave long examples. By the time the first pyres were lit, ravens had already begun their dark departures from the rookery. They did not linger longer than necessity required. The dead needed burning. The wounded needed bandages and broth and rest. Captives needed sorting. Oaths needed hearing. Ravens needed loosing. All of that was done with grim speed. Then the army moved, because standing still after treachery is its own invitation. Robb did not delude himself that surviving the twins had won him the war. He had not become a fool in one dawn. The Lannisters still held the Iron Throne. The Tyrells still fed King's Landing and filled its armies. The Ironborn still squatted in the north like crows on a slain stag. Winter still came. One night's fierce salvation did not mend all fractures. Yet something had altered no less surely than if a river had changed course in the dark. House Frey was broken open before the realm. House Bolton was stripped of pretense. Lords who had begun to doubt what sort of king Robb Stark might make had seen him walk alive from a murder feast, and answer it not with madness, but with steel and judgment. That mattered. Not to songs, perhaps. Songs would embroider anything. But to men who must decide where to lay down their lives next, it mattered greatly. The captives traveled under heavy guard. Walder Frey spent most of the march muttering to himself or demanding cushions no one brought. Roose Bolton spent it silent as ever, riding bound but straight-backed, his face gone wax pale where the wound at his side had drained him. Robb gave orders that neither be harmed on the road. Greatjon disliked those orders and obeyed them anyway. Edmure and Roslin rode together in a wagon curtained against weather more than eyes. Some would have made a mock of the arrangement. Catelyn did not. She had watched them speak by the campfire on the second night after the battle, awkwardly at first, then more steadily, as two people find the edges of one another in the ruins of a thing neither made. Roslin had told him which of her kin she believed blameless, and which had always delighted too much in cruelty. Edmure had listened. He had told her of Riverrun, of the Red Fork in spring flood, of trout leaping silver at dusk below his father's solar, of how the riverlands smelled after rain when they were not being trampled by armies. Roslin had listened to that as if listening to a place that might someday become a refuge rather than another duty. Brynden rode the length of the column like a black-shielded spirit of impatience, cursing wheels that stuck and men who lagged and horses that chose the wrong puddle. Yet there was ease in him now too, hard-won and thin, like the first slice of light under a door after a long vigil. Dacey, bandaged but mounted, took charge wherever he could not, and where their tempers met sparks flew to the entertainment of everyone too tired to laugh loudly. Greatjon spoke little. Grief had gone into him deep and stubborn. But once, when Grey Wind loped up along the wagon line and gave a low huff at the smell of Roslin's borrowed cloak, Greatjon scratched the wolf behind one ear and said, "You've got better manners than half the Freys alive." It was not much. In those days, it counted as healing. Catelyn rode often near Robb, though sometimes she dropped back to speak with Edmure or to visit the litters of the wounded. She found herself watching her son when he did not know he was watched. He bore his crown differently now, not more proudly, if anything less. There was less of dreaming in him and more of the old northern reserve she remembered in Ned, that inward taking of purpose that gave nothing away unless speech was required. The night at the Twins had not hardened him into cruelty, which was mercy, but it had burned off something tenderer than innocence, perhaps the last belief that right action alone could protect a man from treachery. What remained might yet make a better king if the world allowed him time enough to grow into it. They halted on a ridge 3 days north of the Twins where the road bent, and the river could still be glimpsed in the far distance, a dull strip under cloud. The men made camp among sparse trees twisted by wind. Ravens had already begun to return with answers. White Harbor had sent loyalty and promises of ships, but winter seas were no easy road. Seaguard sent word that Jason Mallister would hold the coast and call banners anew. Some lesser river lords offered immediate men. Some offered prayers, which are lighter to carry. One raven from the neck, long delayed, bore only a few careful lines in a hand Catelyn did not know, but Robb read them twice and folded them with unusual care. Howland Reed, perhaps, or one close to him, another path opening in secret marsh. That evening Robb called his chief lords to the fire. No walls, no roof, no stone listening in, only darkness beyond the ring of flames and the smell of damp earth cooling under the stars. "We go north," he said. No one argued the first words. Debate came only with the shape of how. "The riverlands still bleed," said Edmure. "They will keep bleeding if we march south to die under the walls of King's Landing," Robb answered. "Tywin wants us pinned where his strength is greatest and ours thinnest. I will not oblige him. The north is half lost and must be reclaimed before winter closes every road. Moat Cailin remains in ironborn hands. If we do not cut them out, we are kings of memory and snowdrifts." Brynden grunted approval. Greatjon looked up at that, the old fire stirring through grief. Aye. Let us go home and flay the krakens." "No. We leave enough strength with Edmure and Brynden to hold crossings and keep the Riverlords together," Robb went on. "Roslin's marriage gives Riverrun a claim among any Freys who wish to survive by choosing a wiser branch of their blood. Let them choose. Those who swear anew and surrender hostages may keep lands until I say otherwise. Those who do not can learn what siege feels like from the wrong side." Edmure raised a brow. "You mean me to smile at my wife's kin while putting ropes on the rest?" "I mean you to be Lord of Riverrun," Robb said. "It is not a work for boys who want every enemy clear and every friend simple." Edmure considered, then nodded slowly. "Then I had better practice." Roslin, seated a little back from the circle, did not speak. Yet Catelyn saw the way she straightened when Riverrun was named beside her, and knew the girl was listening with all she had. "To the north," Dacey said. "And when we have it?" Robb looked beyond the fire into darkness. "Then we see what remains to us. White Harbor, Barrowton, if they hold true, the mountain clans, the Crannogmen, the Glovers if they can be found. Meg Mormont and Galbart Glover were sent on a mission before the wedding. If they return, they may bring us more than men. Word will go to every holdfast that the king lives and the wolves were not butchered in their sleep. His mouth hardened a little. Tywin bought a song. I mean to teach him how short it was. No one cheered. These were not men for cheering at every plan. They nodded, weighed, accepted. That was better. Cheer feeds itself and dies. Nods build roads. Later, after the council broke and the fires sank, Catelyn found Robb standing alone at the edge of camp where the ground fell away toward dark trees. Grey Wind sat beside him, staring north with that uncanny patience wolves have when they scent a road before humans do. "The stars are out," she said, coming to stand at his shoulder. "So they are." For a while they said nothing. Above them the sky had cleared almost entirely. Cold stars burned between strips of high cloud. Somewhere, an owl called. Somewhere nearer, a wounded man groaned in sleep. "When you were little," Catelyn said, "you used to ask whether the kings of winter looked down from those stars." He smiled faintly without turning. "And you would tell me they had better things to do than watch boys shirk lessons. You never believed that." "No, Toe." His gaze stayed north. "I wanted them to be watching. It made the world feel less empty. And now? Now I think the world is full enough without ghosts." He rested a hand on Grey Wind's neck. "But I would not mind my father's counsel." Catelyn followed his gaze. Somewhere beyond those black miles lay Moat Cailin and the neck and the bones of Winterfell, the wall farther still, and all the unresolved griefs of her house waiting in the cold. South lay Tywin Lannister and gold and courtly lies. East lay the sea and beyond it rumors of dragons. Every direction held danger. Yet for the first time in many months she did not feel only the closing of doors. One had opened in blood at the twins, and because it had opened they were still alive to choose where to walk. "You have his stubbornness," she said. "That is both blessing and curse, if I recall your view. Most blessings are." He looked at her then, truly looked. And for a heartbeat she saw the child he had been, and the king he must become occupying the same face. "I almost died because I trusted a bridge too much. You almost died because evil men mistook courtesy for weakness." He gave a breath that might have been a laugh. "You always did know how to make my follies sound nobler. I am your mother. It is one of my offices." "No, duh." Behind them, in camp, someone began a low song. Not the lion's song, never that again, but an old northern tune about snow on pine boughs and a hearth kept ready against the dark. One voice became 3, then a dozen, rough and tired and stubbornly alive. Grey Wind lifted his head. The hairs on Catelyn's arms rose. Robb turned toward the sound, listening. When he spoke again, his voice was low enough that only she and the wolf heard it. They thought the North would die at a wedding. Catelyn laid a hand on his arm. "Then let them learn how long winter remembers." The wolf gave a single deep-throated growl, not of warning now, but of promise. And somewhere above the trees, a raven beat north through the cold, carrying news that the dead were not all dead, that the trap had broken on the thing it meant to close around, and that the game, far from ending in a hall full of music and blood, had only entered its harsher season.